Noon. Uh, wait, it's morning on the East Coast. I had a fantasy listening to the discussion of marine cloud brightening that a byproduct would be a spray that will eliminate jet lag. That was this morning's vision. Um, it's great to be here again. I was here. The story goes, I don't know, 8 years ago. I was at a geoengineering conference in Berlin and at breakfast with Hugh Hunt, a couple other colleagues. Hugh was complaining that about the lack of engineers in this business. Plenty of scientists, but not enough engineers. And I said to him, well, what are you complaining about? Why don't you have a conference in Cambridge? And he did. It was terrific. I was glad to come, and so still some good memories from that time. We've been talking about this for a number of years, and about many of the options. But it's just great to hear this, to listen to how much work is going on right now on the various technologies. So. Just a bit of more background on my own history. I was thinking about today that what's my discipline as compared to discipline mostly represented in the room. I'm a community organizer. Well, that's how I was trained when I got out of college in the U.S. poverty program. Well, what does that mean? It means that the essence of it is to focus on an issue, an objective. What's the issue and how do you get there? And it can go from a small scale community issue to what we now know the global issue. And an organizer is somebody who tries to make things happen around the issue, the problem, and to come up with solutions and move the politics of it. And my work on climate change began in 1979, I was working on acid rain and ran into some language in a US EPA report on the fact that coal use might warm up the planet, and or would. And I was so struck by that because in all my work in Clean Air Act for 5 or 10 years there, nobody had ever talked about carbon dioxide and the greenhouse effect in US congressional work that I knew about. And I found a scientist right after that named Gordon MacDonald, a geophysicist who was had just written a big paper with colleagues on the CO2 estimates and its impact on the climate system, and went out to see him. And Gordon and I teamed up, and I would set up these briefings and Gordon would do them. And we managed to begin to turn on some people in the Congress, in the executive branch of the US government, in the media, to the issue. But to give you an example of how buried the whole thing was, we went to see a key reporter in the New York Times about climate change. And he wrote a story about what Gordon had to say, but it appeared on page B27 of a Saturday paper. Now, if you know what that means, it means it's buried. And that's kind of where it was at the time. So anyway, this led to many years of work to try to pull off congressional hearings to bring the issue to the attention of the public, the Congress, and the government on the issue. And those hearings occurred in the mid-1980s. They were very successful. They got the issue onto the front page of the major papers in the country and around the world. They had the top scientists like Jim Hansen gave riveting, important testimony. But this was as the issue, just to say a word, that was coming out of what I call the empty room. There was nobody. Nobody was thinking about climate change back then. Just some pieces of the scientific community. It was not a public issue, not a policy issue. It took some leadership from the US Congress really at least in the United States, to bring it forward. And that's where things were. I say all that because you look back to that point in time. This was not possible. If you would call this meeting here, no one would have showed up, I would say, or be pretty close, because nobody knew much about the whole issue and problem and didn't understand the urgency of it. Well, I do want to relate to then that whole process really led to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, to say in one sentence what took many years and huge amounts of work, that I believe was agreed in Rio in '92. One thing that happened related to this morning's discussion was at that time, the earliest reports of coral bleaching were surfacing. No pun intended there, I guess, but once again, here is an example of the phenomenon occurring before the scientific analysis had even predicted it. And when I was at the State Department, we started an initiative called the International Coral Reef Initiative to try to draw attention and track the whole phenomenon. This was in '94, I think it was announced at the Convention on Biodiversity. Well, you can see how far it's come. Now that it's a complete turnaround in the Australian government trying to do really good work on marine cloud brightening because of the crisis that has to do with the Great Barrier Reef. Now, each of these periods of time more data shows up, more impacts show up as the Earth warms. And I wanted to say a few words about the Arctic here, that it was in 2007 and 2012, I believe, that the sea ice numbers, people here track, I know John is here, John Neeson, that they track there he is. An honor to be with you. It's the group in Boulder that reports daily on the sea ice concentrations in the Arctic. And in '07, there was this phenomenally low period. And it was repeated again in, I think, '12, where the sea ice just fell apart. And that led us in Washington, those of us who were organized, trying to make things go, to use the crisis to make things go, to form something called Arctic 21, which was a coalition or a network of organizations trying to convey the urgency of what we call the unraveling of the Arctic. What was the unraveling? Permafrost, sea ice, spring snow cover, small glaciers, and the ice sheets. That all that was happening, it was all documented. We took it to the Obama administration that was about to take over the chairmanship of the Arctic Council. They agreed we need to make this an issue. They made climate change in that particular 2-year period of the Arctic Council a more significant priority. And in fact, President Obama took a famous journey to the Arctic. I recall his speech I guess it was in Anchorage, during his presidency, to highlight what was going on. So this is a bit of how these things have taken place. Now, I want to turn to of the moment. During this period for me, I spent probably 30 years of this time all along working in Florida. Why Florida? With colleagues in Florida. Well, Florida is highly vulnerable, right? You would figure that of all places in the United States, globally, that would take it seriously, that Florida, and has a lot of political clout, that Florida was that place, right? In fact, we even had a presidential debate in 1991 on climate change in Florida. So my work down there with lots of colleagues has proceeded over the years. We had field hearings, congressional hearings down there, led by senators at the time. Lots of work has gone into Florida. There are these huge regional compacts down there of local governments working on climate impacts. And I have a group of colleagues who we've been doing strategy for many years. And on this, and out of those conversations emerged this idea. It sort of came from, okay, Governor, you've probably heard of Governor DeSantis, yes? Uh, Laughter may be appropriate. Okay, Governor, how much is too much? How much sea level rise is too much? What's your answer to that question? Okay? What's your limit? And that was sort of how we proceeded with it. That's sort of the starting point. And out of that discussion emerged this idea that we're now pushing, selling, explaining, calling for the establishment of an upper limit to sea level rise as a second metric in the climate system. Well, why a second metric? Why? Wait, now it's the big challenge. Okay, the slide. Thank you. This is a little postcard that we developed to describe the project and kind of to generate some interest in it visually. So we have formulated this idea as that calls upon governments, locally, nationally, state level governments, whatever, island nations, coastal countries, you name it. Everybody can get on board with a campaign that calls upon the Conference of the Parties or the General Assembly to declare that we need an upper limit to sea level rise. Why is that? Well, because the first metric, temperature, has been successful, but not successful enough, obviously. That the 1.5 degrees just hasn't done it. It hasn't moved the world sufficiently to bring emissions down to levels that would comply with that number, get us anywhere close. In fact, now the estimates are really frightening that we're going to run right past 2 degrees. And these are really serious numbers. So it's not solely the problem associated with the metric of 1.5 degrees, but it's an insufficient metric. And our theory is that by putting a metric around sea level rise, you can drive the politics, because it's easy for much easier in theory for politicians to stand up and say, we've got to limit sea level rise, than it is for them to try to explain how global temperature relates to people around the world. I mean, what does it mean? It's a tough concept for people. So our thought is that this second metric may help to move the politics and allow politicians to make decisions that are required to get the system under control. Now, we have now been handed an issue that we're trying to, I'm watching it, right, thank you, which is a pretty big leap for me to be able to see it and track it. We've been handed an issue, if you think, which is Greenland. And we've been handed that issue, it's hard for me to say, by the President of the United States, whatever, you know what I mean? He wasn't intending to do this, and we haven't made use of it yet completely. But the point is that the real issue for the US national interest and global interest in Greenland is the fate of the ice sheet. It has 24 feet of sea level rise. That's where the destruction and the catastrophic case is emerging from. And I mean, it's gotten so much stronger. The data is stronger. Here we go. Did I do? Excuse me. Thanks. There, that's it. Okay, so this is one version of the trend in Greenland, of the ice sheet, just to remind people of how fast it's going. So our idea is that with Greenland, we have the opportunity to say, the real US, from US perspective, national interest is in the fate of the ice sheet. Okay, that's what Greenland is all about. And we are out there sort of carrying that message. We haven't hit it in a big way yet in the media, but the tie between Greenland and the fate of the US coastlines all over the world, coastal nations, island states, is huge. And our government, without thinking about it, has made Greenland into this giant global issue that everybody responds to now. We did a webinar up at the Harvard Kennedy School on this, attracted a big audience, because our argument was that the real national interest in Greenland was the fate of the ice sheet. And that gives us an opportunity to turn the issue around and turn it to focus on this upper limit for sea level rise. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're still out there sharing this idea, trying to find allies, and welcome feedback, because we made a bunch of adjustments to the ideas we went along as we learned. Well, most importantly is the definition of an upper limit. You cannot control sea level rise completely. You can't stop it for reasons we all understand, I think. But what you can do is lower the rate of sea level rise to the minimum, which means bringing emissions down ultimately to zero. And it offers the rationale to do that. So with that, I'll conclude, and I've got a couple of minutes, I think, for questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Rafe, I'm very pleased that you were the closing talk for today, because having just spoke about very minute technical details on marine cloud brightening, you've really hit home the underlying motivation for exploring these techniques.
Right.
I mean, we always have to, we learn this from business. You have to start with the why. You have to understand the motivation behind what we do as engineers and scientists. So with that, I'll open the floor for questions, and we've got the first one here. And please state your name, where you're from.
Christer Persson, Fuglesang Space Center. You talk about this with the sea level rise as a new metric, and how does that? Have you investigated how insurance companies and reinsurance companies will react to that? Real estate cannot be insured in Florida, in South Carolina, in California. So have you looked at it, because they might be also a promoter for that idea?
The insurance industry.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, insurance is fading away in some of our coastal areas now. As more homes fall into the sea, as storm damage, grows enormously, we have ever intensifying hurricanes. The insurance industry is an important player in this. Now, has the insurance industry stepped up to the policy question in order to lower its own vulnerability? I don't think so, but I'm no expert on that. But I think it's a possibility. As we get better and better estimates of how fast all this is going to happen, but it's definitely underway. There's a big change.
Claudia Wieners from Utrecht University. And I was wondering a bit about your metric. I mean, 1.5 is already a bit of a problematic metric in a world with SRM or geoengineering, right? Because 1.5 isn't clear. Is it 1.5 is mitigation, or 1.5 is mitigation and SAI? So 1.5 is not a clear metric, because there's different 1.5s, which could be very different.
Right.
So similarly, if you would make sea level to a new metric, then you could also think of very different worlds that have the same sea level value. So did you think about what it would politically mean, how you would reach that, how the different worlds would look like? And do you really want to make, again, one very aggregate measure that could include very different worlds, with or without SAI, with or without this and this intervention?
I didn't hear it. You want to repeat the question?
So they're politically...
I have lousy technology. My hearing aids
I see.
are up to you.
There are very different worlds possible which fulfill the same aggregate metric in the same way, like reaching 1.5 with or without geoengineering. So if you would, again, use sea level, which is just one value, but could be realized in such different ways, did you try to think about whether it's good to have another super aggregate metric for so many complex worlds?
Well, I think anything we choose is subject to uncertainty, questions and being able to be moved around. I mean, people say, oh, sea level rise, there isn't, it's different in different places in the world, depending on a number of factors. But I think it's a requirement to have a unified objective that's solid enough that everybody has to rally around. Now, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but 1.5 it's a global objective, right? Global average. That's what we're talking about.
Just to make sure everyone gets a say, I want to give the question to this side of the floor.
Well, hi, I'm Sophie from the Climate Agency, and from a communications perspective, which is where we come from, really see the point because it's tangible, and we can see how the water level would affect the well-being and the economical well. So that's great. However, two questions to you very quickly: is that isn't the level of sea level rise, isn't it going to be like much further away in terms of time than the temperature rise, one, which means it's less tangible then. And then sometimes people seem to talk in like millimeters or centimeters of sea level rise in the next decade,
Right.
which is actually a lot, but it doesn't sound like much
Right.
for the general
Right.
public.
Well, there are timescale problems, where is this? This one, right? How fast is it all going to happen? How fast is it happening? How fast will it continue to happen? The numbers some people don't sound like much, but we're seeing the impacts now, substantial impacts that I think are enough to appear to be enough to alert populations, certainly in the vulnerable areas, to want to act. So, given it's very an interesting problem because there are short-term, nearer-term impacts that are incomprehensible, that are easy to point to. There's also this rather profound piece of this, which is the longer term that I've been grappling with, which are the ice sheets. I mean, and people say, well, we're going to lose the ice sheet, but you look at the time scale, appears to be very long. But supposing you lock it all in now, more or less, and that the planet faces the ongoing multi-century disintegration of the ice sheets. Does that move society? I'm not sure, but I think that for the first time, believe there's a case that you can make. You just cannot saddle the future with this. And that's kind of that piece of it that we have to make that case. And we have to carry that to the policy-making world in a way that changes the perspective on this. That's a challenge, but it's a piece of this. Yeah.
One more question.
Hugh Hunt, Centre for Climate Repair. Great, Rafe, that you've come over to be with us. We had a panel of early career researchers just on the stage a few minutes ago. And in Cape Town, one of them asked a question. Yashas asked a question. And I want to pose Yashas's question to you. What is your advice to early career researchers who are worried perhaps about the optics of SRM on their future career prospects? And you've been around you're our senior statesman, Rafe, and you can give us your perspectives on that.
That's a big burden.
Response.
No, he said what? Well, it's the SRM carrying the argument for SRM and SRM research has been very difficult, but I think it's changed. There are a lot of organizations around and networks that are bringing the fact that this meeting happens. I mean, it's a lot easier case. In fact, the big break has probably been in some of the environmental organizations now that support research. And that's, I think, the reason that has changed is because the impacts, the situation is so dire, it just simply, you cannot duck it. And it's become much more reasonable to embrace research. It's as simple as we heard a lot, the politics have changed or are changing. It's easier for me to stand up here now and say that than it might have been 10 years ago, right? So it's a dynamism in the politics of the issue. And I think if you couple it with what the projections now are for impacts and what we're seeing, it becomes easier. And I also think that framing it as a piece that, the prerequisite, the given, is the emission side. It's a given. You have to have that happen. But we need other tools. And my impression is the politics have moved a lot.
Thank you, Rafe. Could you please thank Rafe Pomerance?
Thank you.